Welcome back to the Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Talking to Steve Beaman with the Society for the Advancement of Financial Education. Say it fast 3 times backwards, and you'll need to go to the hospital. Steve, glad to have you on the program as always every Monday. Checking out what's happening on the news front. I want to continue just a little bit longer the discussion on Detroit. I grew up there in the 60s. It was still such a mighty city even then as it was in decline. And it was amazing. I left in the early 70s but came back to visit in 1980, and it had plummeted between early 70s and 1980s, and now is described as a third world country. I haven't been there in decades. Have no particular desire to go nowadays, to be perfectly frank. But now, there's a lot of talk. You've got, I think, Camden, New Jersey. You've got East St. Louis. There's a lot of cities on the brink that have got to be watching this very closely, this bankruptcy closely. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think you bring up an enormously important point for people around the country. We have an awful lot of teachers and public servants who have worked for years and years with the expectation that they would recover a pension as they got older. Well, as Detroit now goes through this bankruptcy and renegotiates its pension liabilities, I think people around the country need to be watching that. If you've worked for the police or the fire or as a teacher, this will come back to hit you. And I think you need to be aware of that no matter where you live. Watch what happens here and come to the Society for the answers of what it will do to you.
Yep, absolutely. So what about the stock market now? Bernanke's been doing this bizarre dance of, we're not going to buy anymore, then we are going to buy some more. And now he's kind of like really saying, hey, nothing's going to happen for a long time because, you guys on Wall Street are highly emotional. So what's going on with that? People are like scratching their heads.
Well, we had about a month ago, one of the Fed chairmen, I believe it was the St. Louis chairman, came out and said we should end quantitative easing. The response in the marketplace was fast and furious to that, not to use that phrase too much, but the stock market dropped, interest rates on mortgages rose, and the housing market just subsided. So I think the Fed became very conscious of the market's expectation that they better continue this stimulus, quote-unquote, low-interest rate environment, or you're going to see interest rates on up and an economy stall worse than it already is. So it's quite a conundrum for the Fed, but clearly the chairman has come out and said, whoa, hold your horses. We're not going to change anything. You guys can keep doing what you do without the fear of extraordinarily high interest rates.
Yeah, conundrum is one of my favorite words, and you can use it all the time in describing virtually any aspect of government today. Conundrum. Okay, so let's talk a little bit, kind of change gears a little bit. Rolling Stone's doing a very tasteless magazine cover, almost a rock star image of the terrorists that hit Boston. CVS, I think Walgreens, a couple of other businesses said it ain't happening here. You can't find it here this month. Your thoughts on that?
I think Rolling Stone made a big mistake on this. We glamorize and glorify these people as if they're no more than just misguided folks, and that's not true. This guy was an out-and-out terrorist. He shouldn't be on the cover of anything. He is a guy who's going to spend the rest of his life at the Supermax in Colorado, and rightfully so. And so I would like to see that not get a whole lot of publicity. I'd like to see it taken off the shelves. And I'd like to see this creep stand trial, go to prison, and never be heard from again.
Interesting sideline there. Charles Barkley said he agrees with the George Zimmerman verdict, which that's interesting. He always seems to kind of have conservative gut instincts, and then all of a sudden he'll go on a racist tirade about how poorly blacks are treated. But your thoughts about that? Barkley's always been an interesting character.
Well, I obviously watched the trial to the extent I could, and I thought the jury made the jury's decision. We cannot, we can't get into a situation where we jump on juries and say because they're this or that, we don't trust their decisions. Otherwise, you have pure mob rule. And I think for the people like Jesse Jackson who've come out and called for the United Nations to investigate this, they're negating the fact that throughout the country we're seeing black-on-white violence, black-on-black violence, white-on-black violence. This is not just George Zimmerman. This is a systematic collapse of society based on a welfare state that has demotivated and destroyed generation after generation of families. So we need to get back to a society in which individuals are lifted up by their own means and by their own families And you'll start to see then a reduction in the murder rate. And how dare they condemn Florida when Chicago has the highest murder rate in the history of mankind?
Yeah, and how dare they use Chicago as a model for reducing gun violence like they try to do. Yeah, we need more guns off the streets. Really? Like Chicago, which has 10 times more violent crimes? And that's not an exaggerated number. That's the real number. They have 10 times more violent crimes than Houston does, although the population is almost identical. And you're going to use Chicago as an example? Shame on you. By the way, I thought Zimmerman being indicted was an example of how much we've advocated rule of law, because if you read the law of the stand your ground law, there was no basis for an indictment.
No, indeed, and I think it stands as a statement of good that we were able to say, even though there may not be the evidence here, we want to have a trial come out, we want the evidence to be presented and a jury to make the decision. The jury has spoken. There's no evidence that there was any racism involved in this. No hate crime was committed. It was just a bad situation by two guys who shouldn't have gotten into it to begin with, and we need to let it go. But again, the race baiting that's going on by the Jesse Jacksons of the world who are trying to sustain their own power base is absolutely shameful behavior.
Absolutely. By the way, if you're far more generous than I am. If I were in charge, which is probably why I'm not, but if I were in charge, those attorneys that actually brought that indictment, I'd have not only their jobs, I would have their license, their right to practice law, because what I think is absolutely scandalous, un-American, it was abdication of rule of law, it was mob rule at its worst, in my opinion, that it even went to trial, and that was done purely for political reasons. And Mr. Zimmerman's life is ruined. I hope he has plenty of bulletproof vests, because I'm sure he's going to need them for the rest of his life.
Well, the one thing he may get as a windfall on this is his lawsuit that I hear that he's suing NBC for its editing his comments. When they came out and cut his comments out for when the dispatcher said, do you see a race? And he said, well, I think he's black. NBC, as you may recall, cut it out just to say, I think he's black. And so that was a bit of a no-no on the part of that network, and I think he'll collect handsomely. That
very, very important question asked by the 911 person. What race is he? That part was cut out. You're absolutely right. I hope he soaks them. I hope he did. I just hope. Oh, anyway. Okay, I could go on for hours. We don't have it. My producer's freaking out. She thinks I'm going to go on a tirade. I've already had my tirade. But Steve Beaman, you can see why we have him on. Well-versed. He can talk about just about anything. And that's why I always test to see how much we can talk about. And you do a great job. Steve Beaman, looking forward to seeing you here soon in Houston.
I look forward to it, and I hope everybody will visit usdailyreview.com and see what you're keeping up with.
Yeah, great article there, by the way, today or this week over there on your thoughts about the Federal Reserve Chairman who's going to replace him. I want to encourage people to check that out. We'll look forward to seeing you next week, my friend.
I look forward to it as always, Kevin. Have a wonderful week ahead, and to all of your listeners.
You bet. When we come back, much, much more for you. I do want to remind you, best content here does show up over there at usdailyreview.com. Want more information about the society? Email me at info@usdailyreview.com.